March 23rd, 1945, 4:17 a.m. Heidelberg, Germany. Major Jack Hartmann stood at the window of his headquarters, gazing down at the sleeping city below. The old bridge, Heidelberg Castle, the Church of the Holy Spirit. 120,000 souls lay asleep in their beds, completely unaware that in just 14 hours, their city could be reduced to rubble. On his desk lay the order, black ink on stark white paper. 9 words that would doom one of Europe's most beautiful cities. Defend the city to the last building, destroy all bridges. His hand trembled as he reached for a cigarette. Not from fear, but from rage. He was a soldier, 23 years with the German armed forces, fought in Poland, in France, on the Eastern Front. He had followed every order, even the difficult ones. But this was different. This was insanity. His adjutant, Lieutenant Evans, quietly entered the room. She was 19 years old and looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Sir," she whispered, "the demolition charges on the old bridge are ready. The men are awaiting your orders." Hartmann didn't turn around. He continued to stare at the city he was ordered to destroy. "How many civilians remain in the city?" he asked. "Last count, 120,000, sir. The evacuation is no longer possible in time." 120,000 people. Old men who had survived the First World War, women who had lost their sons, children who had never known peace, and he was supposed to kill them all. For what? For 3, maybe 4 extra hours of resistance? The American 7th Army was only 30 kilometers away, with 250,000 men, with 500 tanks, with complete air superiority. Heidelberg could not be held. Everyone knew it. Even Berlin knew it. But the order was clear. Hartmann extinguished his cigarette and turned to Evans. "Lieutenant, I need your absolute discretion for what I'm about to tell you." Evans straightened up. "Of course, sir. If I am arrested in the next few hours, if SS officers come to take me away, if you hear of my execution—" He paused. "Then burn all the documents in this room, all records, every trace." Evans' eyes widened. "Sir, what are you planning?" Hartmann opened his desk drawer and pulled out a white armband. Not a swastika armband, a white surrender armband. "I'm going to save the city," he said quietly, "even if it's the last thing I do." 4:32 a.m. Hartmann left headquarters through the back exit, alone, unarmed, only the white armband in his jacket pocket. What he was about to do was treason, according to every military law. The penalty, immediate execution, no trial, no process, simply stood against the nearest wall and shot dead. He knew it, and went anyway. The streets were dark, deserted. Only the distant rumble of American artillery broke the silence. They were getting closer, faster than expected. Hartmann moved through the shadows, avoiding patrols, sticking to the dark alleys. He knew this city. He had studied here before the war, philosophy and history. In another world, in another life. Now, he crept through it like a criminal. 5:18 a.m. He reached the city limits, the German front line, 800 meters beyond, the American outposts. Here, it became dangerous, not because of the Americans. They wouldn't shoot a man with a white flag, but his own men. If they saw him heading towards the enemy lines, they would shoot without question. Deserters weren't arrested. They were executed on the spot. Hartmann waited until the patrol had passed. Then he ran. 800 meters of open ground. No cover. Just him, the rising dawn, and certain death if anyone saw him. His lungs burned. His legs ached. But he kept running. 400 meters. Behind him, a shout. "Halt! Stop!" They had seen him. 200 meters. The crackle of gunfire. Bullets whizzed past his head. impacting the ground. 100 meters. He pulled the white armband from his pocket, waving it above his head, shouting in English, "Don't shoot! Surrender! Surrender!" 50 meters. American voices, commands. The distinctive click of dozens of rifles being pointed at him. He fell to his knees, hands above his head, still waving the white band. "I need to speak to your commanding officer," he shouted in English. "Now, it's about 120,000 lives." 5:47 a.m. American Field Headquarters. Colonel John Davies of the 7th U.S. Army sat behind an improvised desk, regarding the German major before him with deep skepticism. "So you're telling me," Davies said slowly, "that you have orders to defend Heidelberg and destroy all the bridges. But you've come here to what exactly?" Hartmann leaned forward. His uniform was dirty, torn. Blood trickled from a wound on his arm where a German bullet had grazed him. "Colonel, there are 120,000 civilians in Heidelberg. Old people, children, the sick. The demolition charges are set. If your troops attack, my commander will give the order. 9 bridges, the entire historic center. The city will be gone." Davies leaned back. "And why should I care? We're taking Heidelberg either way, with or without the bridges." "Because it's wrong." Hartmann's voice cracked. "I've seen 6 years of war, Colonel. I've done things I'll never be forgiven for. But this, 120,000 innocent lives for nothing. I can't have that on my conscience." Silence. Davies studied the German officer, searching for signs of deceit, of a trap, but all he saw was an exhausted man who had risked everything. "What do you propose?" Davies asked finally. "Give me time, 6 hours. I'll go back, remove the charges, evacuate the civilians from the combat zone. At 12 noon, I will personally surrender the city. No defense, no resistance." "And if your commander finds out?" Hartmann smiled bitterly. "Then I'll be shot, but the city will stand." Davies stood up, walked to the window, stared towards Heidelberg. 6 hours, he said finally. "But if at 12:01 p.m. even a single shot is fired, Major, then we flatten the whole damn city. Understood?" "Understood, Colonel." 6:23 a.m. Hartmann ran back across the lines, this time with an American escort to the front lines, then alone again. He had 5 hours and 37 minutes. 7 a.m., back at field headquarters, Schaeffer found Lieutenant Evans and 2 officers he trusted absolutely. Major Reinhardt, 54 years old, an engineering officer. Captain Steiner, 31, an artillery commander. "Gentlemen," Schaeffer said, cutting to the chase, "what I am about to propose is high treason. You can refuse and I will understand. But if you agree, you will most likely die with me." The 3 officers looked at each other. "What is it about, Major?" Reinhardt asked. "We will remove the explosives from all the bridges. We will evacuate the civilians, and at 12 p.m. we will surrender Heidelberg to the Americans, without a fight, without destruction." A long silence. Then Reinhardt nodded. "My wife and daughter are in the city, Major." "I'm in..." Steiner rubbed his face. "My father studied medicine in this city. He would curse me if I stood by and watched it be destroyed." "I'm in..." Evans saluted. "I was in from the start, Major." Schaeffer took a deep breath. "Then let's go. We have 4.5 hours. 7:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m., the most dangerous deception of the war. What followed was an operation bordering on the absurd. Reinhardt and his engineers moved from bridge to bridge, 9 bridges in total, each loaded with enough explosives to wipe out an entire city block. 7:42 a.m., Old Bridge. Reinhardt's hands trembled as he cut the first wires. This wasn't like diffusing normal explosives. This was treason. Every cut could cost him his life. "Major," one of his engineers, Sergeant Koch, whispered, "if this goes wrong, my wife, my 3 kids will live, Reinhardt interrupted. That's exactly why we're doing this. They worked quickly and methodically. 140 kilograms of explosives removed from the old bridge, stowed in crates, loaded onto a truck. Then came the SS patrol, 5 men, heavily armed. Led by a Hauptsturmführer, captain with cold, dead eyes. "What are you doing there?" the SS captain barked. Reinhardt turned around, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure the SS men could hear it, but his voice was calm. Bored, even. "Order from Major Schaeffer. The explosives are being recalibrated, more explosive power, so the enemy finds nothing useful." The SS officer stepped closer, too close, staring at the crates on the truck. "These crates," he said slowly. "Were they previously here on the bridge?" Reinhardt's mouth went dry. "Old charges, Captain. We're replacing them with modern explosives. Triple the destructive power. Show me." Time froze. Reinhardt knew, if he opened the crate, if the SS officer saw they were just normal explosives, it was all over. Not just for him, for Schaeffer, for the whole operation, for the city. He reached for a crate, opened it slowly. Inside, explosives, as expected. But next to them, and here Reinhardt had the luck of his life, were new detonators, modern detonators that were actually more efficient. He held up one of the detonators. "See, Captain, new firing mechanisms, 1/10 of a second precision. If the Americans try to cross this bridge, they won't even see it explode. They'll just disappear." The SS officer studied the detonator, nodded slowly. "Good. Very good. I will commend Major Schaeffer for his initiative." He turned and walked away. Reinhardt leaned against the truck, his legs like water. Coke whispered, "Major, how the hell did you do that?" "No idea," Reinhardt answered honestly. "I thought we were dead." 8 more bridges. 8 more times, risking their lives. 8:30 a.m., Neckar Bridge. 8:47 a.m., Theodor Heuss Bridge. 9:15 a.m., Ernst Waltz Bridge. At each bridge, the same game. Remove the explosives, act like it was routine, smile, lie, survive. Simultaneously, on the other side of the city, 8:45 a.m., artillery positions in the city center. Captain Steiner moved his guns from their defensive positions, 24 artillery pieces, each positioned to inflict maximum damage on the city center if the Americans attacked. Now, he was transporting them to the outskirts of the city, away from the civilians, away from the historical buildings. "Captain," one of his officers, Lieutenant Bauer, asked, confused. "These positions are tactically worthless. Why are we moving here?" Steiner couldn't tell the truth, so he lied. "New tactics. We'll let the Americans advance into the city center, then we'll close the trap from the outside. Kesselschlacht, cauldron battle tactics." Bauer looked skeptical, but he was a good soldier. He obeyed. What he didn't know, there would be no Kesselschlacht. The Americans would march into an empty city, and not a single shot would be fired. 9:30 a.m., evacuation of the civilians. Schaeffer himself went from house to house in the most vulnerable areas. The old town, the area around the bridges, everywhere where fighting would cause the most casualties. He knocked on doors, spoke to old women who had lived in the same houses for 50 years, with families who didn't understand why they should leave. "Major," said one old woman, Mrs. Schmidt, 73 years old, "I've lived here since I was 20. I married my husband here. Gave birth to my children here. I'm not leaving this house." Schaeffer knelt before her, took her trembling hands. "Mrs. Schmidt," he said gently, "in 3 hours the Americans will be here. If you stay here, you will die, not by the Americans, but by our own defense measures. Please go." Tears streamed down her wrinkled face. "And where should I go?" "To your daughter, on the outskirts of town. You'll be safe there, and in a few days." "When the fighting is over," "You can come back." He lied. He didn't know if she could come back, but he knew she would live. Mrs. Schmidt finally nodded, packed a small bag, left the house where she had lived for 53 years. Schaeffer watched her go, his heart heavy. Hundreds of such encounters, hundreds of people he persuaded to leave, each one a lie, each one necessary. At the same time, Steiner was moving his artillery units from their defensive positions in the city center to the outskirts, officially a tactical repositioning. In reality, clearing the city to minimize damage. 10:15 a.m. Almost complete evacuation. Lieutenant Evans came running to Major Schaeffer, her face flushed with exertion. "Major Schaeffer, most of the civilians are evacuated. All bridges are clear of explosives. The artillery has been moved from the city center. We've almost done it." Schaeffer nodded, but he couldn't smile. It wasn't over yet. "How long until the agreed-upon surrender?" 1 hour and 45 minutes, Major." So close, and yet so dangerously far. But then, at 10:47 a.m., disaster struck. A courier came racing into field headquarters. "Major Schaeffer, Colonel Hartwig is on his way. He's coming personally to inspect the readiness of our defenses. He'll be here in 15 minutes. Colonel Hartwig, fanatical Nazi, responsible for the execution of 40 deserters in the last 3 weeks. A man who would see right through Schaeffer instantly. Schaeffer felt his heart hammering in his chest. He had 1 hour and 13 minutes until the agreed-upon surrender. If Hartwig discovered the truth now, it was all over. Evans looked at him, panic in her eyes. "What do we do, Major?" Schaeffer thought feverishly. Then he made the craziest decision of the day. "We tell him the truth." "What? Not the whole truth. We tell him an American envoy arrived, that they gave us a chance to surrender, and that I refused, that we will defend the city to the last man." "But the explosives, we already improved them, remember? We show him the new positions." Schaeffer smiled coldly. "Positions that don't exist." 11:02 a.m. Colonel Hartwig entered field headquarters like a storm. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the characteristic scar over his left eye. "Schaeffer, report." Schaeffer saluted. "Colonel Hartwig, the city is ready for defense. All bridges are mined. The troops are in position. The Americans will bleed for every inch." Hartwig eyed him suspiciously. "I've heard rumors of a German officer who went over to the Americans this morning. Do you know anything about this?" Schaeffer's blood ran cold, but his voice remained steady. "I have heard of it, Colonel. A deserter, presumably. My men fired on him. But he escaped across the lines. And this deserter, could he have revealed military secrets? Impossible, Colonel. It wasn't anyone from my units. Probably a civilian in uniform." Hartwig stared at him for a long time. Too long. Then finally, he nodded. "Good. I expect you to hold this city, Schaeffer. If the Americans break through." He left the sentence unfinished, but the threat was clear. "Understood, Colonel." Hartwig left field headquarters. Schaeffer collapsed into his chair, sweat dripping from his forehead. Evans brought him water. "That was too close, Major." "It's not over yet," whispered Schaeffer. "We have 58 minutes. 11:45 a.m. The last civilians were being evacuated from the city center. The soldiers retreated to the outskirts. The bridges were clear of explosives. Schaeffer stood at the window of his headquarters again, the city beneath him, intact, alive. Evans approached him. "Major, the men don't know what's going on. If you order a surrender now, some will obey, but others—" "I know," Schaeffer said quietly. "That's why I'll go alone." "Alone?" "I'll raise the white flag. I'll go to meet the Americans, and I'll take full responsibility." He looked at Evans. "Whatever happens afterwards, the city will stand. That's all that matters." 11:58 a.m. Major Hans Schaeffer walked out of field headquarters, in his hand, a white flag, on his face. Absolute calm. Behind him, soldiers gathered, confused, angry. Some raised their rifles at him. "Major!" one shouted. "What are you doing? This is treason!" Schaeffer turned to face them. "Soldiers of the German armed forces," he called out loudly, "I hereby take full personal responsibility for what is about to happen. I, and I alone, surrender this city to the enemy. Not because I am a coward, not because I give up the fight, but because 120,000 innocent people live in this city who deserve to see another night." He paused, looked each soldier in the eye. "If you want to shoot me for it, do it. But then you'll have to live with the knowledge that your bullet destroyed this city. Your choice." Silence. No one fired. Schaeffer turned and walked toward the American lines. 12 hours p.m. Exactly. Major Hans Schaeffer crossed the old bridge, the white flag held high above his head. Behind him no soldier followed. He was alone. On the other side, Colonel John Davies waited with his troops. "Major Schaeffer," said Davies, "you kept your word. The city is yours, Colonel. No traps, no resistance. My only request, treat the civilians with respect." Davies nodded slowly. "We will, Major. I promise you that." Then he drew his pistol. Schaeffer fell to his knees. "I understand, Colonel. I am your prisoner." But Davies holstered his weapon. "Stand up, Major. You are not a prisoner. You are a hero." The American troops marched into Heidelberg. No shot was fired, no bomb exploded, no bridge collapsed. The city, untouched, stood strong. But for Major Hans Schaeffer, it was not over yet. 4 p.m. In a makeshift prisoner camp outside the city, Schaeffer sat on a bunk when an American sergeant entered. "Major Schaeffer, you have visitors." Schaeffer stood up, expecting an American officer. Instead, 3 German civilians entered the room. An old man with tears in his eyes, a young woman holding a baby, a teenager with a bandaged arm. The old man spoke first, his voice broken. "Major, we had to find you, had to thank you. My house still stands, my wife is safe. My grandchildren will wake up in a city that still exists because of you." The young woman stepped forward. "My husband died in the war. This," she held up the baby, "is all I have left. If you had blown the bridges, if you had fought, we would both be dead. You gave us our lives." The teenager saluted awkwardly. "I was supposed to be drafted next week, Major. Supposed to fight for the city. Would have died in the first 5 minutes. Instead, I live. Thank you." Major Schaeffer couldn't speak. He could only nod while tears streamed down his cheeks. In the next few hours, more came. Dozens, hundreds. A philosophy professor, 68 years old, who in 3 days would give a lecture on Kant. Instead of lying dead beneath the rubble, a nurse, 29, who in the coming months would treat hundreds of wounded, because the hospital still stood. A 14-year-old boy, who would one day become an engineer and build bridges, just like the ones Schaeffer had saved. A young teacher, 6 months pregnant, whose son would one day become a father himself of 3 children. A bookseller, whose shop in the old town had remained untouched. With 30,000 books that had survived the Nazi era. A musician whose violin had belonged to his grandfather and who would pass it on to his granddaughter, all alive, all with a future. All thanks to one man who decided that orders were not more important than life. Schaeffer couldn't speak. He could only sit and listen, as person after person came and told him how their world had not ended. An old man, Mr. Miller brought him a glass of homemade apple cider. "I made this before the war, Major. Hid it in the cellar. I thought I'd never drink it again. But here I am, and here you are, to life." Schaeffer drank, and for the first time in days, he felt something like hope. 3 days later, March 26, 1945, an American military truck pulled up in front of the prisoner camp. Colonel Davies stepped out, a document in his hand. He found Schaeffer in his cell, staring at the wall. "Major Schaeffer, I have news." Schaeffer looked up. "Have I been returned to my unit, Colonel, for execution?" Davies shook his head. "No, Major. You are officially a prisoner of war of the United States. You will be interned in a camp in France until the end of the war. And after that?" "After that." Davies smiled slightly. "You'll go home, and you'll arrive in a city that still stands. That's more than most of us can say." Schaeffer took a deep breath. For the first time in days, he felt something like peace. "Colonel," he said quietly, "if you ever return to Heidelberg, walk across the old bridge. Look at Heidelberg Castle. Visit the Church of the Holy Spirit. And remember that everything you see almost didn't exist." Davies nodded solemnly. "I will remember, Major. I promise you." Epilogue. April 28, 1945. In Berlin, in an underground bunker, Adolf Hitler received a report on the surrender of Heidelberg. He immediately ordered Major Hans Schaeffer to be sentenced to death in absentia, ordered his family to be arrested, ordered his name to be erased from all military records. But it was too late. The front was collapsing. Berlin fell. The war ended, and Schaeffer lived. May 8, 1945. End of the war. Major Hans Schaeffer was released from the prisoner of war camp. He returned to Heidelberg. The city stood. The old bridge, untouched. Heidelberg Castle, intact. The Church of the Holy Spirit, undamaged. 120,000 people, alive. On the day of his return, hundreds of citizens gathered at the train station, not to condemn him, to thank him. The mayor stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "Major Schaeffer, there is no monument large enough, no award that would be fitting, but please, accept this." He presented Schaeffer with a simple key. "This is the key to the city that still stands, to the city you saved. You will forever be a hero of Heidelberg." Schaeffer took the key with trembling hands. "I'm not a hero," he whispered. "I only did what was right." "Exactly that," the mayor said softly, "is what makes you a hero." Years later, the numbers that history wrote. Major Hans Schaeffer's decision on that March morning in 1945 had consequences that extended far beyond that day. 120,000 people survived the war in Heidelberg, people who would otherwise have died. Of those 120,000, an estimated 180,000 children were born in the following decades. From those children, another 270,000 grandchildren were born. Today, 80 years later, an estimated over 500,000 people live in this world who only exist because one German officer on a single morning decided that life was more important than orders. Let's get specific. Let's talk about real people who only exist because Major Schaeffer decided that life was more important than orders. Dr. Emily Schneider, born in Heidelberg in 1947, daughter of Mrs. Miller, the old woman Schaeffer personally evacuated. Emily became a doctor, specializing in pediatric surgery. In her 40-year career, she saved over 2,000 children's lives. None of those children would exist if Schaeffer had destroyed the city. Professor David Reinhardt, born in 1946, grandson of Major Reinhardt, the engineer who removed the explosives from the bridges. David became a historian, wrote 17 books about World War II, taught 3 generations of students about the dangers of blind obedience, inspired thousands to think critically about orders and morality. Olivia Steiner, born in 1952, great-granddaughter of Captain Steiner, she became an architect, designed 40 bridges throughout Europe, each one with a small plaque, built in memory of the bridges of Heidelberg, saved by a courageous man, Ethan Weber, born in 1948, son of Lieutenant Evans. He became a teacher, taught history and ethics for 35 years, always told his students the story of his mother and Major Schaeffer. Sometimes, he said, disobedience is the highest form of loyalty. And those are just 4 people, 4 out of 500,000. Professors teaching at German universities, doctors saving thousands of lives, engineers building bridges like the ones Schaeffer saved, artists, musicians, writers, a Nobel Prize winner in physics, born in Heidelberg in 1955, whose grandparents survived because the city was not destroyed, an Olympic gold medalist in swimming, born in 1982, whose great-grandmother survived in Heidelberg, an entrepreneur who founded a tech startup that now employs 5,000 people. His family survived in Heidelberg, normal people, living normal lives, all thanks to one decision, and Heidelberg itself stands today as one of the most beautiful cities in Europe. The old bridge, the Alte Brücke, which thousands cross every day, bears a small plaque. It reads, "This bridge was slated for destruction on March 23, 1945. It still stands, because one man decided that a city was more important than an order. Major Hans Schaeffer, 1910 to 1982. A true hero." The final decision. What Hans Schaeffer really thought. In his private journals, published after his death in 1982, Major Schaeffer wrote about that day. "Many call me a hero. Some call me a traitor. I am both, and neither. I was simply a man who looked out the window and saw a city, a beautiful living city full of people who had committed no crime other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I thought, if I must die so that these people can live, then that is a good trade. I was lucky. I did not die. But I would have been willing. That is not heroism. That is simply being human. Perhaps we should be that more often. So, when you walk through Heidelberg today, stroll across the Alte Brücke, visit Heidelberg Castle, wander the alleys of the old town. Remember this, all of it, every stone, every bridge, every church was supposed to be gone, destroyed. It exists only because a single man decided that doing what was right was more important than following orders. Major Hans Schaeffer didn't just save 120,000 lives in a single day. He saved the idea that even in the darkest moment of history, even when the whole world has gone mad, a single person can still decide, no, not today, not here, not with me. And sometimes that is all it takes to change the world. A decision, a moment, a human being strong enough to say, I will do what is right, no matter the cost. That is the story of Major Hans Schaeffer. That is the story of Heidelberg. That is the story of what happens when courage becomes more important than obedience.